Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Zebigi wash processed Uganda from Father's Coffee Roastery. And there's the bag right there. And Father's, based out of Ostrava, Czech Republic, and they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel multiple times before, and a coffee roaster we've had mostly positive results with, as the Karamo, their natural processed Ethiopia, remains one of my favorite natural processed coffees that we've reviewed this entire year. In addition to that, we have received some requests from people to review more coffees from this coffee roaster, and that works out quite well, as I've also mentioned that we're trying to review more origins, as we've pretty much stuck to 5 for the majority of the year. So this being a Ugandan coffee from a coffee roaster that we've had positive results with, felt like a great fit. So we'll see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 36. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 98 degrees Celsius, about 208 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. So they do have it listed as a filter roast, and I will say that it is slightly lighter relative to a lot of the American coffee roasters that we do review on this channel. But that being said, it's maybe not quite as light as some of the other coffee roasters, including the Nordic and some of the Asian coffee roasters that we've reviewed on this channel. So I think the best kind of middle ground for that, given that that's a very wide range and spectrum, is to say that this one is maybe on the more developed side of a light profile, as this one didn't even feel quite as light as some of the other ones we've had from Fathers in the past. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and opted for the Chemex, and the cup came out a little bit more moderate and tame than initially expected, with an almost Central American and South American-like cup, offering mostly chocolate and nutty forward aspects with a slight citric brightness to the cup. Lighter bodied, but pretty straightforward in general, so a decent start, if maybe not what I was expecting. Day 16 went through the V60 on this day, and it was a little bit different of a cup, as it was more in line with African and Kenyan coffees, as there's a bit more savoriness and brightness. It honestly just felt like this coffee needed a bit more time, as there was a bit of an undefined and slight nutty citric aspect to the cup on this day. Day 19 ran it through the April brewer, and there was still a little bit of an odd sense to this one, as it was reminiscent of what I would describe as a generic coffee flavor. And I know that that's an unusual description, but that's the best way I could describe this coffee, as it just tasted like coffee. There's a slight bit of savoriness and a bit more nuttiness to the cup, but nothing overly strong, definitive, or vibrant in any specific direction. So definitely not my favorite day of this one so far. Day 22 increased the concentration up to temperatures back through the V60, and it's the best it's been to this point, as there's a more focused component to it, if still a little bit subtle in general. More of a darker sweetness reminiscent of the listed Tinos on here, but also a elegant and refined nutty chocolate aspect to the cup. And then on day 25, same adjustments to the Chemex, and it feels like it's the best representation of the coffee up to this point, as there's more of a focus on the lighter tea-like aspects, complemented by a slight citric brightness, cooling off into a nice caramelized nuttiness. The best day of the coffee so far. And I kind of sped run through these first 5 days, because as you can see from these first 5 notes, they were all very different, so not necessarily the most consistent coffee. Even when we did make the adjustments and kind of settle on those adjustments, they were very different based off of the brew method. So this one was a tricky coffee early on, but the reason I felt like this day 25 was the best representation of this coffee was because it was the most in line with the listed notes that they had on here. Up to this point, it maybe didn't specifically head in that direction, but that day 25 mark seemed to indicate we were on the right track. Day 29, back through the V60, same adjustments as the previous experience, and the coffee is the best it's been up to this point, which did kind of give away that maybe this one just needed a little bit more rest. It's the most vibrant it's been, but for the most part, still relatively tame overall, as it's light-bodied up front with a strong focus on the tea-like aspects and a more mild citric component throughout before finishing in a strong and nutty sense. Day 30, one last try through the Chemex, and it honestly validated that the coffee has mostly improved on its own with time, as this is the best Chemex day it's been up to this point, with a little bit more depth and sweetness overall. A bit more of some dark tart berries to complement the lemon-like citric aspect, And on day 32, final notes we have for this one, the coffee has been pretty consistent since we made those adjustments, as it's offering a fair bit more of a brightness reminiscent of those darker tart berries yet again, though there is a slightly moderate and lighter tea-like profile to it, with the citric aspect being the most defining factor, complemented by a notable nuttiness yet again. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's start with the cleanliness level 4. Yes, and even though this one may not have had the most defined profile to it, there isn't too much to kind of mar the overall cleanliness that was present within this one. So I do feel that it is justified at that level 4 mark, even if there wasn't an overly defined profile for the majority of the time drinking this coffee. Acidity, level 4. Yes, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, because this one did have a fair bit of brightness to it, and it was reminiscent of, well, just Kenyan coffees, but that's not too surprising. This is partially SL14 and SL28, so just kind of interesting in that sense, but yeah, I'm not honestly sure what to make of the brightness. It was just kind of interesting and contrasting to what this coffee was in general. Citrus fruit, level 4, that's where I was mostly getting the brightness from this one, was the lemon-like aspect to it. And if I recall correctly, I do think that they have a lemon note listed on here, which makes a lot of sense. It was one of the more defining factors of this coffee, right up there with the nuttiness. And that's why the savoriness is there at the level 4. It's this very strong tea-like savoriness as well as nutty savoriness to this cup. So we have some level 4s that I don't think really go together overly well, so that's just kind of interesting. I think one of the other things they have listed on here is like hazelnut. I could see that. It's very nutty in that sense, and I think the other thing they have listed on there is tea. So if this tasting wheel is a good representation of the notes that they have, then you can see all of those things being in somewhat notable abundance in this coffee. In addition to that, though, let's go through the level 3s. We'll start with the finish, level 3. That's one of the most confusing parts about this coffee, is it didn't really have a long-lasting finish in any sense. So it wasn't overly sweet, which you also see at a level 3. So it kind of had this quick finish to it, and it was that tea-like, lemon-like, nutty finish, and it was just very quick in this one. So that's weird to me, a little unusual, not what I was expecting from this one. Florality at level 3. There's that slightly kind of floral chocolate component that's present within this one. That's why both of those things scored those level 3s as well. Saltiness, level 3, and that's again going to be through the nuttiness that's present within this one. Berry fruit, level 3, that is reminiscent of those Kenyan-like berry attributes. So it's a little bit more slight and subtle, even though the brightness is kind of high, but I was able to experience that from this coffee. And then the other thing we have at that level 3 is the bitterness, which is attributed to the lemon component that was in this one. So given that some of the other things like the sweetness and finish are toned down, it's interesting that the citrus is at the level 4 and then the bitterness is at a level 3, which goes to show that that was strong, but then it kind of dissipated quickly, which made this coffee interesting in that regard. And then last thing I think worth noting in this tasting wheel is the body heat at a level 2. Probably attributed to the Chemex. I was just kind of thinking on that when making the tasting wheel that in theory, on paper, maybe I expected to have this, for this coffee to have a little bit more body, but obviously the Chemex does kind of have a huge role in the way that the body turns out within this coffee. So it's on the lighter side of things, but as I'm kind of looking through this tasting wheel and trying this coffee one more time, I could say, even though this one looks a little weird, this is actually a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Honestly, I've never been the biggest fan of Ugandan coffees, and that's probably why this tasting wheel looks so unusual to me, and it's because I don't have as much familiarity with this origin as I do with a lot of other origins, but that's to kind of say that on paper, this one didn't really sound like my type of coffee. I was just hoping that since I'd had such great results with this coffee roaster in the past, this one might turn out better than I was expecting going into it, but that didn't necessarily end up being the case. As I kind of look at this coffee and I say it stumped me. I don't really know what this coffee was supposed to be, and I couldn't get the sort of things I was looking for. As I always say, we start the conversation with the sweetness at the level 4, and since it didn't finish there, and then interestingly, the finish didn't finish at the level 4, I don't really know what to make of it or what this coffee was supposed to be going for. So I will pin this on me, saying that I couldn't get this coffee right and I couldn't figure this one out. But it was a pretty unusual cup of coffee for me, as it went in a direction that I guess is representative of the notes that they had listed on here, but even then I was maybe expecting a little bit more from this one in general. type of person I would suggest this coffee to, and I'm going to point them in the direction of two very notable things, and that's of course going to be the lemon-like attribute and then the savory tea-like attribute, as those seem to be the two things I was getting in most abundance, and also a fair bit of nuttiness, because those three things, while as generic and basic as it is, being the listed notes that they do have on here, those are the three things you're able to get to the most with some work and adjustments. But maybe you could get a little bit more out of this one because it's still a little bit more mild, moderate, and tame of a coffee in general. And that's honestly the impression I had of it and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Zebigi wash processed Uganda from Father's Coffee Roastery. Thank you for watching.